Next on the list is Mr. Kesselring.
Ich bin Mitglied von Actares.
I'm a member of Actares and I live in Bern. Mr. Thiam, Mr. Rohner, dear shareholders. Before voting on the capital increase, I think we might want to have a look at the legacy issues to see whether there are any hidden mines, or in other words, whether the seller of Credit Suisse might not harbor some dead bodies. Dead bodies such as this one. I'd like to ask you to take us to the maze of that seller. Talking about a loan of more than $2 billion that CS London, together with the Russian bank VTB London, gave to Mozambique in 2013. Now, 3 weeks ago, Mr. Rohner said, when he replied to me, that all of that was not quite so easy. So it'll take a couple of minutes as we contemplate this dead body. Mozambique is a country far away. But even faraway countries and insignificant countries can turn out to be devastating if you deal in illegitimate business with them. Let me remind you of a couple of things that bring up questions in the context of this deal, also legal questions that were not dealt with before. And secondly, I'd like to talk about the difficult situation Mozambique had gotten into because of that. And thirdly, I'd like to talk about the consequences. The consequences with which you, dear shareholders, will have to reckon with. Mr. Rohner said one of the loans had been private, the other one had been public. The second one had been handed out for fisheries. The middleman in Mozambique used both loans for military purposes. And that's why they wanted to keep a lid on the two loans. With regard to one of the loans, they were not successful to keep it secret because Credit Suisse had issued bonds where they had to provide information about the purpose of the loan. One of the architects of the deal said in front of the Parliamentary Commission, or Inquiry Position, said, well, we couldn't simply go there and say the loans had to be used for military purposes. That's why we pretended that there was a fisheries industry to be built up for tuna. Secondly, the fleet had to be built in France. And the French celebrated that deal with Mozambique. This is a poster dating back to September 2013. On the left-hand side, you see François Hollande. And here you see Armando Guebuza, president of Mozambique, and Thief, and Iskandar Safa, the operator of those fleet of ships, former friend of Gaddafi. When Gaddafi was killed, he started supporting Guebuza. And he is the central deal maker in the story that we need to look at. The world press back then talked about 200 million euros to build the fleet of ships for fishery purposes, so-called. But Mr. Rohner said that the loan handed out by Credit Suisse amounted to 500 million, and it was then increased to 850 million. There's quite a difference between 200 million euro and 850 million euro. And the press in Mozambique wrote about that for months, wondering where those monies might have been disappeared. A couple of examples here. Mr. Kesselring, what we're talking about is a capital increase. Of course you can talk about this issue, but please be brief. Well, there's a very specific question that I have for you. Now, knowing that this loan was public, why did you not say anything about the purpose of that loan and the actual amount of that loan? We now know that 91 million had actually been spent on tuna fishery fleets. The rest had been spent on military ships and ammunition, etc., with lots of monies disappearing. The fleet of ship built have never been taken to sea. How can you explain, Mr. Rohner, that Credit Suisse issued bonds of up to 500 million for such nonsense? And the whole thing is even more complex because prior to that loan, you had issued an even larger loan of 504 million, also for military purposes, to Mozambique. That loan was a private loan. You confirmed that last time. Now, that in itself is not a reason to hide it in front of the IWF and the World Bank. There was an existing agreement with the IWF and Mozambique that such loans had to be reported to the IWF. Mr. Rohner, Mr. Thiam, in restructuring of the tuna fisheries loan, the Credit Suisse said nothing about these secret loans. Why? And I'm again asking the question. We'd asked it already in December, and Actares asked the question 3 weeks ago, and it has not been answered yet. And there are other facts that I find highly irritating. This very first loan for military tools, etc., had been planned, as we know from Mozambique, and this begs the question, Mr. Rohner, whether you had not, from the very beginning, January and February 2013, known about the military purposes of these loans? And if not, why not? Something else is strange too. The Russian bank and Credit Suisse issued loans of almost the same amounts. Credit Suisse 1 billion and 4 million, VDP 1 million and 3 million. This can hardly be a coincidence. It looks very much like some agreement had been struck. The loans were equally different in the composition, that the whole thing seems to have been obfuscation. If a small, medium-sized company wants to take up a loan, it is sourly tested. If a government of a poor country with rich in resources takes up a loan of 2 billion, everything seems to be possible without any further inquisition. Mr. Thiam, Mr. Rohner, the London subsidiary, and here I'm quoting from Article 43, paragraph 2 of Financial Market Law, did the subsidiary look at and assess the risks entailed in that business? Was it led by persons that guaranteed the propriety of the business? Was it appropriately organized? Did CS London fulfill its due diligence and its obligations? And I need to say something about the difficult straits Mozambique is in. Mr. Kesselring, you should get to the end. You've had sufficient time to address this issue in the context of the General Assembly. I have a couple of questions that refer specifically to the capital increase. Mr. Thiam, Mr. Rohner, do you not believe that the English supervisory body should have or will sanction Credit Suisse? Do you expect a fine from the Securities Exchange Commission in the United States? Because at the end of the last year, SEC started its inquiry, and Credit Suisse share price immediately dropped by 3 to 5%. It has since recovered because stock exchange seems to have forgotten about that, but it's not over yet. And how do you think creditors will behave? Where Credit Suisse sold its loan to insurance companies, hedge funds, how will they react? Those that took up the loan, they will expect losses, and agreed to team up. They might have demands on Credit Suisse. And what about Mozambique and its poor population? There is little opportunity for that country to ever pay back that loan. The credit for tuna fisheries is 726 million. That's 5% of Mozambique's GDP. If it was Switzerland, it would be a debt amounting to 33 billion. That is 4,000 Swiss francs per person in Switzerland. That's what it would amount to. And final question that most shareholders will be interested in: what provisions did you make to bury this dead body? Or have you at all provisioned for those losses that you will certainly incur? Thank you very much, Mr. Kesselring, for your speech. You have presented many reproaches as facts, and I can say the following only. Our annual report talks about legal issues according to the stipulations of the law. An inquiry is ongoing, and of course we fully cooperate in this inquiry. Other than that, I cannot make any statements on legal business. To the extent that Credit Suisse and Credit Suisse members may have made mistakes, we would of course take responsibility for that. But of course, first of all, we will actively participate in this inquiry. And above and beyond that, there's nothing I can say, except provide you with a very general answer. If there are any legal risks that we need to assess, we do so on the basis of applicable legal content and IFRS rules. And as far as credit risks are concerned, we have an eye on those always, and we're perfectly convinced of the fact that credit risk is properly dealt with within our bank. Thank you very much. Mr. Schuchen is our next